Summary of a Separate Piece by John Knowles. A man named Gene Forrester, who is now in his 30s, goes back to the prep school he went to as a youth, the Devon School in New Hampshire, after 15 years. He looks at a set of marble stairs in Devon's main building and is amazed at how much smaller they look than he remembers them being. But he also knows that they haven't changed at all and that he has. He walks across campus to look at a big tree by the Devon River with this thought in mind. He is again shocked to see that it is much smaller and less important than he remembered. He is glad he came to Devon because he can now see that he has grown and changed how he thinks about the hard times he went through as a youngster. Gene comes to this understanding, and the story jumps to 1942, when he is about to start his last year of high school. During the summer term at Devon, Gene, who is smart and careful, and Finny, who is playful and athletic, are both students. World War II is going on in other parts of the world. Finny, Gene, and a few other kids hang out by the river one day under a big tree. A program at the school called Physical Hardening helps high school grads get ready to join the military. This tree is part of that program. As part of this program, you'll have to climb the tree and take a risky jump from the top branch into the river, clearing the bank as you go. Adults are the only ones who have done this before, but Finny climbs the tree and jumps. Gene follows, even though he is scared. It turns into a habit over time, so Finny suggests that he and Gene start a club. They call it the Super Suicide Society of the summer session. You have to jump out of the tree as part of the rituals to join this secret club. More importantly, Finny and Gene start every meeting by jumping off the cliff. This means that Gene has to get over his fear all the time because the Super Suicide Society meets every night. Gene and Finny get closer as the summer goes on. Gene, on the other hand, starts to really dislike Finny because he thinks his best friend is trying to keep him from studying by being too good at sports. Finny gets him to agree to ride their bikes to the beach the day before a big math test, which makes him think this. Even though Gene would rather study, he agrees with Finny's plan. The two boys have a great time and sleep next to each other on the sand. Finny tells Gene that he's his best friend as they look up at the stars right before they fall asleep. Gene wants to say the same thing but can't bring himself to. The next day, they just barely get back to school in time for Gene's test, which he terrible does on. Because of this, he secretly hates Finny for taking his attention away, thinking that Finny wants to hurt his grades because he sees him as a competitor. Gene thinks that Finny wants to get in the way of his studies, but one night he sees that Finny doesn't really feel that way. Finny tries to get him to stop studying so they can go to the tree, but he gets angry. This makes Finny tell him that he should keep working on his schoolwork if that's what he wants. Gene says that if Finny was as smart as Gene, he would also be working on school. Because Finny said nice things about Gene, he doesn't see him as a rival. Gene is angry that Finny doesn't see him as good enough to be his rival. He then reluctantly follows Finny to the tree, where Finny suggests they both jump at the same time. Gene grabs the root and bounces the branch, which throws Finny off balance as he walks out on the branch. Finny turns around to look at Gene for a terrible second before he falls to the ground and breaks his leg and his baseball career. In the future, Gene visits Finny in the hospital to see if he thinks he is guilty of something bad. At first, Finny hints that he does think Gene may have caused him to fall, but he quickly says sorry for jumping to such silly conclusions and tells himself off for having such negative thoughts about his best friend. Gene gets up from his seat and gets ready to tell Finny the truth, but Dr. Stanpole, who is in charge of Devon's hospital, steps in and sends Gene away. Soon after this conversation, Finny is sent home, and the summer program is over. Gene only spends 1 month at home over the summer before going back to Devon. On the way back, he stops by Finny's house and tells her that he hurt his friend. Finny doesn't believe him, but Gene keeps saying that he's at fault for a long time. Finny finally tells him to shut up and says he'll kill him if he doesn't. Gene knows that he's making Finny feel even worse, so he says sorry and explains that he's not making sense because he's been traveling so much. When he gets back to Devon, he finds that the normal masters have put in place the strict rules that were in place during the summer term. The senior boys also become more aware of the war, and soon, a boy named Brinker Hadley persuades Gene to join the army after most of their classmates offer to help clear snow from some nearby train tracks since so many workers have left town for the war. Gene agrees to join the military with Brinker the next day, but when he gets back to his room, he finds Finny sitting at his desk, and he no longer wants to go through with his plan. The next morning, Brinker goes into Gene and Finny's room and continues a joke that he's been telling for a while. Gene made Finny fall on purpose so that he could have their shared room all to himself. When Finny asks Gene what Brinker is talking about, Gene tells him that Brinker wants him to join the army to take his mind off of it. Finny is shocked by this, and his sad face shows that he doesn't want Gene to leave him. Gene then turns on Brinker and tells him that he will never join up with him, which makes Finny very happy. In a shocking change of events, Finny and Gene's nice friend Leper Lepelier joins the military and leaves school right away to help win the war. After Finny got hurt, Gene decided that things like sports don't seem important in light of the war. But Finny says that the war is made up by fat old men who want to control the younger generation. Soon, Finny gets Gene to start training for the Olympics, which used to be Finny's dream. It gets harder for Gene to train, but the two boys get closer again, and Gene feels a peace inside that he's never felt before. Finny suggests one day that the boys have a winter carnival. At this event, they can play rough in the snow, drink hard cider, and enjoy a general sense of teenage fun that is, compared to the war, pretty harmless. It goes really well until Gene gets a text from Leper. The text says that Leper has quit the army and wants Gene to come to his home in Vermont right away to meet him. Gene finds out that Leper ran away from the service to avoid being kicked out for being mentally ill when he gets to Leper's house. Leper tells Gene that he started hallucinating because of all the stressful things about being in the service. He started seeing strange pictures that made him scream and cry at random times. He ran away because he knew that getting out of jail for mental illness would make it hard for him to find work later on. Gene feels more and more uneasy as he talks because he knows that the military, where he and all of his friends will eventually end up, isn't as great and satisfying as people would like to think. He tells Leper to stop talking because of this, but Leper doesn't listen and continues to say that Gene has always had something ugly inside him. He says this is what Gene did to make Finny fall from the tree. When Gene hears this, he kicks Leper out of his chair. The two boys make up soon after, but Gene is very upset about what Leper said. Back at Devon, Brinker starts to wonder why Gene hasn't joined the army. He thinks it might have something to do with Finny's fall, which means Gene feels bad about what happened to his best friend and doesn't want to leave him behind by joining the army. Furthermore, both Finny and Gene agree that the war is real after hearing the story of what happened to Leper. This is because only something important could make someone like Leper respond so badly. At this point, Finny sees Leper hiding behind a bush and then runs into a teacher's room. Brinker and a few other students gather Gene and Finny that night and hold a fake hearing to look into Finny's fall. Even though Gene doesn't want to do this, they ask Finny what he remembers about that night. Leper is eventually called as a witness, and what he says about what happened in the tree makes it clear to everyone, even Finny, that Gene planned the fall. Finny gets up and runs out of the room quickly. He goes down the hall and then crashes down a nearby set of marble stairs, breaking his leg again. That night, Gene tries to visit Finny in the hospital, but Finny is mad at him, so Gene spends the night walking around campus and feeling like he doesn't belong there. He goes to see Finny again the next morning, and the two boys agree that Gene's acts at the tree were not planned. Finny also says that he has been writing to different armed groups for a whole year, hoping desperately to find one that will let him help win the war. But since they all turned down his wishes, he chose to forget about the war altogether. Finny dies that afternoon when a small bit of his bone marrow gets into his blood. Gene will likely have to get used to hearing bad news like this, says Dr. Stampole, because he and his friends are going to war. Even though things have gone so badly, Gene doesn't cry at the funeral or during the wake because he thinks that Finny is now a part of him and that people shouldn't cry at their own death. Once Gene and his friends get over Finny's death, they graduate and join the military's best branches. Without Finny, Gene never sees active action. He thinks that he fought his own war at Devon and knows the hate that all men feel.
About the author. John Knowles was raised in a well-known and rich family in West Virginia. He started going to Phillips Exeter Academy when he was 15 years old and finished in 1944. He then spent a brief time in the Army Air Corps Aviation Cadet Program before attending Yale after World War II. Knowles worked as a reporter and trip writer after finishing in 1949. He then started putting short stories in magazines. Thornton Wilder, another famous author and friend of Knowles, told him to write a book based on his own life, so in the mid-1950s, Knowles began writing a separate piece. People loved a separate piece when it came out in both Britain and the US in 1960. Knowles won the William Faulkner Foundation Award for Best First Book and was nominated for the National Book Award. Knowles wrote 6 more books after that and then taught writing at several universities, including Princeton.
Hope we summarized it fully and you liked it. Please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel so that we are motivated to create more videos.